Something else that I take my subscribers through, it's not just about seeing a peak and collapse every 18 years. You can actually go back over the unfolding of each cycle and come to a view about different phases within the cycle, which are also pretty regular and pretty repeatable. Essentially what you find is you get around 14 years of expansion and 4 years of peak, crash and recovery for a full 18-year period. And the 14 years of expansion itself consists of two halves of around 7 years, interrupted by a mid-cycle recession. Now, the mid-cycle recession tends not to be anything to do with the property market and rarely involves major bank failures. So automatically, if you're not seeing land in your economic models, you can't explain the differences between different types of recessions. There's just there's no purchase on that particular problem. What you tend to find is that the first half of each cycle, of the expansion part of each cycle, tends to be the cycle when everyone's worried about the previous financial crisis, banks are still recovering, there's not really much credit available in the economy, and you feel that the next collapse is just around the corner. The second half of the cycle tends to be much stronger, and in particular, the last 2 years, which I've called the winner's curse phase, is a phrase that I've borrowed from other economists who research this thing. It's essentially there's such a headlong rush to purchase assets. And you know, if you go back to the previous cycle, talking about the period 2005 to 2007, there's lots of easily available credits. Banks have either worked our way around the regulations or the regulations have been loosened. That was designed to prevent financial crises. And people really just want to buy property, or they want to acquire companies with cash flow. I mean, major private equity deals are features of this period in the cycle. It's a winner's curse because you might do well to beat off the competition to obtain these assets that you're competing for, but actually beyond the peak of the cycle, you'll very soon face a situation where you have negative equity, or the asset that you've purchased is worth less than the loan you took out to purchase it. I've included some of the dates from the cycles in the second half of the 20th century on there. So the first cycle started around 1955, peaked in 73. The next one started in 75. We had a mid-cycle recession in 81, which actually was fairly significant. But then the 80s boom, this was the era of the age of greed, Gordon Gekko, greed is good and all that sort of thing. But then a major sort of recession into around 93, which is when the third cycle after the Second World War started. Mid-cycle recession in 2001, I've put it in brackets if you can see that. I've done that because the UK technically avoided a recession in 2001. The US had 2 quarters of negative GDP growth, but the UK managed to avoid it technically. Now, I don't know if you remember in 97 with the new Labour government, Chancellor Gordon Brown came in and said, I am going to tame the boom and bust cycle. And then when the UK avoided recession in 2001, it was evidence that he had indeed tamed it. But of course, he then enacted one of the most significant programs of public investment in modern UK history, presided over a massive land boom, and unfortunately for him, was the Prime Minister when it all came crashing down. Who would be a politician? A